she would like to ask us all what we already know about this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and yeah, we are recording this session for everyone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon for me. I'm at 4 o'clock in the afternoon here. So I'm going to introduce trauma-informed pedagogy. Keep in mind, this is a large topic. So we have a brief time. So this will be a starter kit for you. And so you will need a device because I do have a few QR codes, and I will be using interactive polling. So you'll need that to access the activities. And there is one short breakout group activity. So if you want to scan this QR code, it will take you to the slides. That will be helpful when we get to the third activity. So you can, if you need to read the case study, you'll have that with you. You can either scan the code or you can put in menti.com and the code at the top. So the code's at the top of the screen, 33936512. So I'll give you a second to do that. And then we can access the first question to practice to make sure everyone's into the system. Feel free to use the emojis in the corner. I love that when my students do that. So feel free to do that if you like to add in those. Okay, and then could folks give me a thumbs up if they're in, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, all right, let's go. And if you haven't accessed the slides, you'll be able to on the next one as well. Okay, so let's make sure everyone's in. So what is your level of knowledge about trauma-informed pedagogy? It looks like we have a lot of people right in the middle, so that's good. And a couple of people feel confident, and then several that are completely new. So good. So I hope that what I share will help everyone. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I always like to share this quote at the beginning of this talk to kind of set the tone. This was one of my favorite quotes from Bell Hooks, who is a leader in anti-racist pedagogy. So I'll just read that. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. So this to me is the heart of trauma-informed pedagogy. And I just want to set a few community norms since we will have a small group activity. So just remember that this is an inclusive space and it's a shared space, and to respect confidentiality and speak from your unique perspective, and then be mindful when others are speaking in your group. And this is a modified version. So if you want that full version, it's through the American Geophysical Union. And then my goals for our time together is just to introduce the impact of chronic stress on the brain and its effect on learning. Since I usually give this to academics, I like to use some of the science behind how stress affects the brain and how people respond when they're under long-term stress, which is trauma. And then introduce just the concept of this type of pedagogy. And then we'll do a few activities to think about how we might implement it in our own classrooms. Basically, we'll focus on signs that you might see in a student, how you can respond maybe better the next time you interact with that student. I have a few slides coming up that are a little bit longer because I wanted to show you the definitions and that there's a lot of different terms related to this. So don't feel like you have to read it all. You will have access to all the slides and the information later. But I am going to read this one because I think this to me is the one that hits home for me. So essentially, trauma-informed pedagogy is a set of teaching approaches that lets us really consider that broader impact of trauma, and then how we get students to resilience, and also ourselves. So part of what I focus on for this is how do we stay resilient ourselves in doing this work, because it's traumatizing just doing the work in the classroom. And so this approach is anchored in the assumption that individuals are more likely to have experienced something. So everyone has gone through some type of trauma, no matter who you are. It's just how you respond, and maybe how you're genetically programmed to respond to that trauma, where we run into trouble. And so as educators, we can actually seek to remove some of these barriers and learn how to just, you know, put different events in place so that we can respond better with our students. And again, you don't have to read all these. I just wanted to show you that there are a lot of different versions of this. So I just gave you a smattering, and it kind of depends on the population that you're working with. So you can see that you can kind of, you know, adapt it to your background. So I'm going to kind of skim through this one. But I'll just highlight a couple though. So especially those of us doing work in DEI, we know that those populations tend to have a little bit more trauma in their lives. Also different socioeconomic status individuals will have more trauma based on their circumstances generally. So I just like to point that out. That's been usually my population of students that I work with, but there could be other students with disabilities and so forth. And then if we look at the types of actual trauma that students might experience, think about acts of terrorism. So we see that even in our own country. Generational or historical trauma. So think of the Holocaust, Native American genocide, etc., slavery, sexual and gender-based, racial, disaster and conflict. So those that have been through traumatic hurricane, etc. And then healthcare and health and healthcare. This is one I actually used to use in my class. When I taught ethics, we looked at traumatic events during healthcare and how that affects people's health. So that's usually experienced more by women, especially women of color, and during birth. I think most of us are probably familiar with that, but they tend to have issues with reproductive health that others don't have. And so what we want to keep in mind with this is that trauma acts as a lens or a filter for how we see the world. And so that involves us as well. So how we respond to that student in the classroom is based on our response to trauma. And so again, this work is really just getting better at our own responses so we can help the student. And so it also lets us take a step back and think about what that student might be experiencing. And then I'm not expecting anyone to be their psychologist or social worker, but we can connect them with the resources at our schools. And then a little bit on the science. So some of you are probably familiar with this. So this is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland axis. So basically controls our stress response. And so we have two sets of hormones, that help control our stress response. So we have cortisol, and then we have adrenaline. Excuse me. And so I have a couple of the parts of the brain highlighted. So you can see hippocampus and amygdala. So those two are really affected by the stress hormones. So if you're familiar with the brain, you know hippocampus is where we store our memories, and it's the structure that's affected by Alzheimer's disease. And so stress hormones are actually, they're looking at that as a potential cause of Alzheimer's, but in the moment, it can actually cause students to forget things. So think about when we've all taken tests and it's stressful. When you have that temporary loss, memory loss, it's due to your stress hormones affecting the hippocampus. And so you can imagine if that's long-term, it does affect the learning over time. And then the amygdala is our seat of emotions. So when we have consistently high stress hormones, it affects how we respond with our emotions. On the, I'm going to share a resource page at the end of the talk with you. And on that resource page, you'll see that there's some videos. If you're familiar, you may be familiar with Robert Sapolsky's work, but he studies stress in primates. And then there's a couple other videos there if you really want to dig into the science of stress. So I used to, when I taught nursing students, I would include this in my talk with them because I taught pathophysiology, so I could. And so I would always talk to them about how their job can affect their health and to how to help mitigate some of those things while we were learning the science behind it. And then this is some new research that I just found that was done during COVID. So it shows you how an unstressed brain versus a stressed brain responds. So with the unstressed brain, you can see the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain and our personality, has a tighter control over how it connects with the rest of the brain. And then you can see in a stressed brain, there's less control of how things are connected. And so the response is not as good. And then you can see how it really emphasizes the amygdala. They highlight that in this diagram as well. And then the hippocampus, which isn't labeled, but it's highlighted but not labeled. So and then over time, this can actually damage the brain. So interesting. And I didn't dig into it, but you may, if you're interested, I don't know, it makes me think about, that the long COVID and how that long-term disease might affect the brain as well. So. And then I know this is kind of a busy diagram, but you can look up the reference. I used to use this one for teaching, but I like to show how early life stress on children, even in the womb, can affect how you respond to stress as an adult. And so one of the videos that I have on the resource page digs into this a little bit, where they actually looked at babies that were born during World War II, and their moms were going through the starvation period and had a lot of, stressful situations going on. And then they followed their children through their lifetime up until present day because they're all still alive, and looked at all the health issues they have related to that. And then it also talks about epigenetic stress is basically passed on. So changes that are made to the genes, the epigenome are passed on generationally in mice. And so they're looking at that in humans as well with these retroactive studies. So it's really interesting to me in trying to work on mitigating those stressful events for us again and for our students. This I just want to mention because we don't have the time in this workshop to take this test, but I do have a link to it on the document that you'll get at the end. There is a perceived stress scale instrument that you can give your students, and it's very short, but it's really more for the students' information. So it's not something you would collect, but you may want to give it to your students at the beginning of the semester, maybe as a check-in point throughout, just to let them know where, hey, my stress level is getting high. And then you can just have a class discussion. So they can share out if they like, but I think it's a good tool to use. If you want to, if you're seeing a stressful situation with your students, then you can, maybe have a fun day in class or do something that will help them relieve some stress. I always take candy because that always seems to help. Okay, so we're going to do activity 1, looking at the stress response. So this is an individual activity. So I've got a list of 7 steps, and I'd like you to put them in the correct order. So we'll see who knows a little bit about the stress response, and then we'll look at the correct answer. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. So this is just a drag and drop, Noreen. So you just have to drag and drop them into the correct order. So there's a beginning and an end to the list of items. So you have to find the first one and then put them in order of the steps that you think they go in the stress response. Looks like almost everyone is. I'll give another 30 seconds. I find I like to model some of the activities you can do to help mitigate stress. So I find using the Menti polls helps mitigate stress because students don't always want they want to respond anonymously. And so you will sometimes get students who wouldn't normally participate in activities to engage. And as an introvert myself, I don't always like to do group work the entire time. So it's kind of fun to watch these. Okay, so it looks like everyone's got them ranked. I'm just scanning through, see some last minute twitches going on. Okay, these look pretty good. It looks like you all did a good job putting them in the right order. So let's see. I will show you the correct list, and I think you all had them right at my quick scan there. So the first thing that happens when you respond to stress is that, so the situation here was that you're working with a student and they became agitated, and then they started to yell at you and accusing you of not helping them. And so I know we probably all had this in the classroom, and I know I definitely hear this from students as a dean. And then that's going to trigger your emotional brain to sense a threat. And it's going to set off some alarm bells in your brain. And then your thinking brain is going to check out and confirm that you have a threat and that it's real. And then it's going to go offline and your emotional brain is going to take over. So this is where that amygdala comes in. And then the emotional brain is going to go into fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's what you're going to want to do. But then with this pedagogy is to kind of stop that response and think about what can we do instead. Okay, but in this scenario, you'd react by maybe raising your voice and telling them they need to leave. And then your thinking brain comes back on and your body will calm down. So in this scenario, as we move through the rest of the talk, we're going to want to stop what we do at number 6. We're not going to want to yell at the student. And we're going to figure out some ways that we can change our thought processes there. So a lot of the research done on trauma-informed pedagogy has been done at the K through 12 level, but there is quite a bit of literature, although not as much, on college students. So these are some specific things that we see in college students. So missing class a lot, issues with emotional regulation. And I can say that safely, I think, as in dealing with my own faculty, that I think sometimes we as faculty or administration also have this problem. Fear of taking risks, anxiety about deadlines or working in groups or speaking in public, withdrawal, anger, helplessness, maybe dissociated, and then involvement in unhealthy relationships. So these students sometimes will overshare and tell you things that you may not want to hear. And because it's a traumatic event that they're going through, and I don't know, as a woman, I tend to find that someone that identifies as a woman, I tend to find that students reach out to me more, and I don't know, maybe it's my personality, but it's something to be aware of. Okay, so for the next activity, we're going to look at, I'm going to use Padlet, so I'll put the link in the chat in a second. So what we're going to do with the Padlet, you'll see that it is a series of columns with different terms at the top. So each column is a different scenario, and you're gonna to add a comment, you just click on the plus sign, and then it'll let you type in a response. Okay, and then I will put the link in the chat, or you can also scan this QR code to get to the Padlet. And I'm going to put the Padlet up live so you can see what it looks like as well, because we're going to watch everyone respond in real time. And the directions are at the top of the Padlet as well. All right, I don't want to freak everyone out, but I'm gonna click out of the Menti for a second so I can share the Padlet. I know sometimes that is a little weird when I have to transition. Okay, so you should be looking at this now. So we've got a bunch of terms here, or slash scenarios that you could think of. So I'd like you now to put so we've talked about the stress response. So now put your trauma-informed glasses on and think about how you might view these students. So these are all common terms that we've used in academics to describe students. So we've got one person already, yay. So maybe they're just tired from working too many hours, or someone in their family's going through health issues, but they may appear unmotivated in your class. Good. Feel free to choose whichever of the terms speak to you, so you don't have to do them all. So I'll give that one a heart. Okay, so under disrespectful, we have working in a group where they have less or no interaction. Okay. Also under unmotivated, lots of life events. Okay. In the past, we may have thought they were lazy, but maybe they're just overwhelmed. Attention seeking students may be insecure or have imposter syndrome. Good. Oh wow, a lot of people like the lazy one. Yeah, have a job and are taking too many courses. Maybe their education or experience did not give them high expectations. I'm going to go to a different one, manipulative. So the student is stressed and they think if they can just get one more thing, get one thing, their stress will go away. With disrespectful, perfectionist. Yes, I've seen that. Under too much pressure. Unmotivated, maybe they're depressed. Oh, these are all great. If you haven't used the Menti app or Padlet before, I really like these with students because you can actually download these into a PDF and share them with students. I also use it with my faculty when we do brainstorming during meetings, so we can I can share this out with them. So just a little tip if you didn't know that. Sometimes they feel like they're really contributing when you then share it back out. All right, let's look at a couple more. Okay, under disrespectful, we have perhaps channeling issues from another setting at home or work, and you're the authority person that they're taking it out on. Good. Yeah, these are great. And I'm going to go to attention seeking again. So in the past was served by external affirmation or attention. Resistant, we haven't done that one. Seeking scaffolding or facilitated first step. Yes, I think that's especially true. I've noticed after COVID, I actually am teaching a class right now, and they were especially resistant to wanting to study, which seems odd for a college class, but they were more than I had seen in the past. Also, lack of confidence under resistance. Yeah, so they may not know how to get started. Do not have access to adequate resources. So they become lazy and yeah. So I think you all have good trauma-informed glasses to start out with. Great. Okay. I will share this out. I'm going to share all my materials, so they'll be posted, but I'll share out the results of this so you all will have it as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that and switch back over to my slides. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick reflection before let me make sure I'm in the right spot here. Yep. Okay, so let's do just a quick individual reflection. So let's take a minute and think about those two activities and how it has changed your thinking a little bit about how you might approach students. So you'll need to go back to the Menti slide deck in case you need that help. Oh, sure. Sorry, I just saw somebody was asking for the Menti number. Give me 1 second. Should be at the top of your slide. For some reason, it's not showing up for me. If you go to menti.com, actually, there's a link. Let me find that. It should be in the chat. There's a link to the slides in the chat. There's the link. All right, we've got a couple coming in. So changed how I think about it in things like resistance and unmotivated. Always need to think about where students are, what their circumstances are, an appropriate resource or extensions. More willing to accept a background story. Seek to understand why they are responding. Perspective matters. Try and put yourself in their shoes as often as you can. Okay. This last activity really made me think about the reasons for student behavior. And how we don't always know why they appear unmotivated, lazy, etc. Okay, good. That was kind of my goal. It's really important to consider the whole student, not new, but reinforced in a different way. Yep. Understanding the core elements of trauma, taking into account various variables, will help bring more justice to not only one, but all diverse students, making the classroom more inclusive and equitable. And it didn't occur to me that long COVID can be experienced as a trauma. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many aspects that we just don't think about, and everyone responds to trauma differently. And it's really thinking about I like to take the time to reflect because that helps me relieve some stress, and just thinking about why am I doing this? Because I know I hadn't taught for 2 years, just to give an example, and then I had to teach at the last minute because we didn't have enough adjunct faculty. And I said, sure, I can do that. And then I was so stressed out because it was coming in late and to the class, getting things prepared. And then I wanted to go back into my old ways from when I started teaching, at the beginning of 20 years ago. And I'm like, why am I doing this? So to me, it's a practice. So I like to, this is the time in the talk where I like to stop and really reinforce, take time for yourself, because you can for students is going to take a toll on our health as well. So take that time off, step away from work, do whatever makes you happy. I like yoga, Pilates, walking my dog, and not thinking about what I need to do at work. Just taking that time for yourself and finding the resilience in yourself. Otherwise, we can't do this work. Okay. So I think a lot of you had hit the point home with the reflection and the activity, but just some general guidelines for responding to trauma is just be mindful of your power dynamics. Because I know I deal a lot with student complaints. So I know sometimes it's related to power dynamics because we tend to be the authority in the classroom. And sometimes we don't want to give that up. So just being mindful of that and how students perceive that, being empathetic and open and flexible, within reason. Actively resist re-traumatization. So I always like to provide a little warning on certain topics that may affect people differently. And, you never know. Seek ways to promote and empower safety and trust in the classroom so that they feel like they could come to you if they had an issue, or just making sure they feel safe when at least they're in the classroom. Reminding students about the resources on campus, which a lot of you mentioned in the activity, and then engaging in your own self-care, which is what I've mentioned. So good. Okay, so this is our last activity. And this is where we're going to go into breakout groups. So we have a scenario here. So I'm going to read the scenario, which is in bold, and then I'll give you the background story on this student. So we have Maria, who is 19 years old and a first-year student. So she most often appears disconnected and disinterested. She fidgets, avoids eye contact, mumbles when you ask her questions, and mostly doesn't appear to care about anything. So she seems to understand the material sometimes and does well on assignments sometimes, but refuses to engage with others during the school day. It gets increasingly frustrating to keep prompting her to sit up and engage. These power struggles frequently end with her leaving the classroom or putting her head down for the remainder of class. So some background on Maria. She has an extensive history of trauma. She was removed from her home in second grade and placed with her aunt due to experience of severe abuse and neglect. Over the years, there have been several failed attempts to reunite her with her mother, who struggles with addiction. Okay, so you can see some of her issues. So we'll give you about, let's say about 4 minutes in the breakout rooms to discuss this case and how you might respond to Maria as if you were her instructor.
Oh, hi, Beth. I think we'll be bringing people back in another minute or so. Is
Yeah,
that
my
okay?
power went out, so I got bounced out.
No
Yeah,
worries. We'll
okay.
have everyone come back in about another minute or two.
Okay.
Because I could tell people are still having discussions. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry to have been bounced out of that because my power went out.
no, no worries. I hope your power comes back on.
Oh, it's up back on now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on because of the Wi-Fi. Yeah.
All right. I think give it another minute or so.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Siley, did your group have enough time to discuss? Did your group have enough time to discuss?
Nobody was speaking in my group. So there were two people. There were three of us, but two of them were probably not at their stations. So, but I had half a mind to come back out here and ask you to put me in a different group. But it's all
Oh,
good.
now you know how the students feel,
Yeah.
right? When they get put in a breakout room and no one's talking. Because I visited a couple of them and people were talking. So
Yeah, I just did the thinking on my own.
have you ever had students that you've observed like that? I think we all have. Oh,
We need more time.
oh, we need more time for discussion. I feel like we could probably discuss this all day long.
I know, I wanted, yeah. Well, I do have time, we can take a little time. I was gonna spend some time debriefing here together as a large group. So if you want to put your mic on, or I have a Menti open-ended question response, so you can add something here. But I wanted to spend a little time as a whole group before our end to discuss the case. So feel free to put your mic on or add something to this page. Pat, did you want to share something out?
Yeah, don't make me don't make me the one to start. I just know that I've had many students over the years that you could pick up signs that they were having issues, and that there's ways that we can reach out to them and help them know the resources that are available. But I also wanted to say that in my group, I said I do a lot of group work in class, and often the group can sense issues and help the student and reach out to them, maybe sometimes better than we can. But we need to be a little flexible in our approach and our guidelines if we're going to help them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know I do a lot of group work as well, and like to ensure that I let them self-select generally, because I think they tend to form better bonds when they select their own groups and have a support group. But I think it's also because I've always been at a commuter school or a community college. And so I think it's easier. I think if you had larger classrooms, you can mix them up. Laura.
I wanted to kind of bring up something I thought about when reading the example of Maria, where so she's had this prior trauma and she's got these distinctive behaviors that also probably relate to maybe what she experienced when her mother was pregnant with her, like fetal alcohol syndrome or something physiological elements. So we've got trauma. We can see that. But the other thing that Maria would need is knowing the resources at her university that could actually help her with something that might be more biological, that is not just a stress behavior students may exhibit. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but
No, that makes perfect sense.
Trauma plus to me.
Yes.
And
Yes. No, that's great. And those are things sometimes people don't recognize, that if they're in a foster system, and sometimes those things aren't fully treated, and that you add on the medical issues on top of the trauma of being taken away from your parents, etc. Yeah. That's a great example. Did anyone else want to share?
I was going to say one of the things that caught my attention was in the thing how it said the instructor was telling her to sit up in the class. And Amy and I discussed this in our group that we caught on to that. And I don't think I've ever done that, because to me, that's singling a student out and you don't know where that student's coming from. And maybe if you've, for me, at least practices I've done in my classroom is if you've got a student who you notice something like that is going on, I'll reach out to them via quick email outside of class and say, hey, I noticed you've been coming to class, but I noticed you've been missing some assignments. Is there something going on? And kind of approach it that way. And it tends to open the door for them to seek help if they need help, or to also let them know that you care, you've noticed them, you're concerned about what's going on.
Yeah, we talked about that in my group as well. I agree. I don't like singling students out like that. I'd rather help them seek out assistance. Yeah. Great. And we had a post. So someone posted on the slide, allow flexibility, but help with resources at institution, and reach out to her and allow others to help. Must first approach to the student alone, but offer help and flexibility. Yeah, great. We can keep discussing that. I'm going to stop sharing my slide for a second because I want to show you the resource page. So I put the link in the chat, and then I will give you a QR code if you didn't catch that in the chat. Can you all see the resource page? Okay, so I created this resource page so that you all have all the goodies. So there's lots of resources here. Sorry if I don't want to scroll too quick because I know some people, it affects their eyes. So I've got a couple of good videos, and there's some, I call it kind of trauma-informed adjacent, but if you're not familiar with Maha Bali, I've got some of her talks here. She does education from hospitality. She takes some of the theory between hospitality and applies it to teaching, and it's really interesting. So there's a couple of talks from her, and then also Mays Ahmad. She's who I learned trauma-informed pedagogy. I've done 3 workshops with Mays, and she's an amazing person, but also just very knowledgeable. And she also is a neuroscientist. So I have some of her work here. And then, so there's Maha's work on equitable hospitality in the classroom. And then if you're not familiar with ASCN, we actually did a workshop with Maha. So I put that where she talked about incorporating it into your teaching. And then some information on building resilience for faculty. So I like Elena Aguilar. I've done some training with her company called Bright Morning. And she has some great books out. One is on resilience for educators, and she's an instructional coach. So I highly recommend her work, but her podcast, and I put a few here that are linked to resilience specifically. She has a free podcast through Apple and other sources. So I recommend her as well. And then of course, I can't leave out the science piece. So I have some lectures from Robert Sapolsky because I personally love his work, but there, and then the perceived stress scale and some other goodies are here to help as well. And my contact information is on there too.
Super, you've given us a year's worth of work.
I know. Oh, we had one more post I just saw. So asking other instructors about the student, ask student residence life and coordinator about social and living issues at the university, and inquire about the work that the student might be doing. Oh, great. And then if you didn't catch that in the chat, here's the QR code for that page. And you'll get a copy of the slides too. And then I will take any questions, or if you want to continue talking about Maria's case, that's great too. We have a few minutes left.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was really wonderful and really practical. Loved how interactive it was. We'd love to keep the discussion going since we have a few more minutes. So anyone who ever would like to chime in either about the case study or any questions for Melissa, just go ahead and raise your hand and unmute.
Melissa, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Based upon your experience with trauma-informed pedagogy, do you find, I'm assuming that you've rolled it out to rest of your staff, your faculty. Have you found resistance with it? Have you found acceptance, or is it kind of like divided? You have those that embrace it, others that are set in their old ways.
It's a mixture. So we have